The artist passed by again in the distance. Only last night she had dreamed 2 words, he to board. She woke right after to an animal scream outside. When she looked out her window, she saw 2 cats wrestling, mouths full of each other's fur. In the dream, the words meant, he said, but she didn't recognize their language, and in the morning, they weren't in any dictionary she could find. It happened often that her dreams left scars on her body, left physical evidence behind for her to ponder during the day. Sometimes she woke with her nightclothes in a mass of endless wrinkles, or with her blood still throbbing in a place where he had touched her, before his image washed away. And sometimes she even awoke with the river still dripping from her, though some would say it was just sweat. She had turned down another street now, rounded a few more corners. The yards confused her, and she wasn't sure how far she was from the creek, or if she should still be heading for it, much as she wanted to. Anyway, her heart was drumming behind her ribcage at noontime, and this was more than she knew to hope for. Her heart was sending the blood everywhere with urgency, to every surface of her skin, and deep below to her no place. This blood was her guide, her compass, her protector. With it she could discern every movement around her, could tell at once the difference between a rabbit ducking behind a cinder block and a scrap of plastic tarp flapping in a river wind. And the blood in her no place carried her legs along surely, quickly. She vowed to remember this day if she ever made it back to the houses, and tried to memorize how to reach it. It helped to write things down in the mornings, she knew, when the words came straight out of the river. If you let the dreams become ink, they had a better chance of being born of flesh, a better shot at existing on the map. Whatever the words at that hour after waking, if they weren't from the dream itself, they still came directly from that river, crawled out soaking wet. Dripping with the nighttime, they still sounded like the cat's cries and the trucks on the graveyard shift. But water could summon and water could slip away. If you weren't careful, your muscles were soon clenched and you were standing in a dry riverbed in the middle of your apartment, very close but very far from your bed that was just recently a river. The drone of the daytime trucks became the most normal sound to your ears, and the painful cries of the cats suddenly annoyed you, made your nerves wince. Wheels squealed past a far corner, and after that, a horn. She dared not look yet, but she thought for certain it was the van she'd seen earlier come to bring her harm. The sound as it approached made her sure of it, an eerie pitch she'd never heard before, not like the cranky car horns of the city, but a wail with real emergency in it. There was a mocking in the noise, too, as a sound being sent ahead of its source to warn of a fate she couldn't anyway escape. Only chain links and barbed wire lined her path. The sound traveled swiftly up the corridor of the street, the way noises carry quickly over water. The man and his van were bound to the road, could only move as fast as gravity and friction allowed. They were still several paces away now, but the sound had long since reached her, had come up behind her and grabbed hold of her, had burst its way inside of her until every muscle hummed with its vibrations. The van came to a dead halt in the road. Her body twirled around, her blood did the thinking, the bottle flung itself at the driver's side of the windshield, landed there, glass bits flew, eventually to end up again with the gravel and the weeds and the cans on the ground. She stood there with her feet firmly planted and the blood frantic through her veins. But facing her wasn't the van, only a station wagon, nor the man with the ugly proposal, just a long-haired old woman shoeing a junkyard dog who'd left his sentry post. She, the old woman, was screaming now on a note to match her horn, and she, the young woman, sprinted to another street until she couldn't hear the wails anymore. She laughed now from her gut, she didn't know why. Maybe for knowing that the bottle had landed right where she'd aimed it, or maybe it was just her belly laughing and not her mind at all. And now she was starting to tire. The charging blood was growing weary. It could only run this fast for small bits of time. Even long wars, after all, sustained merely a series of very short battles. She was starting to wear herself down with her own heartbeat, but she knew she didn't want to go back to the houses until she found the water. Didn't want to return to the other side until she watched the ship with the billowing sails pass over the clean blue. And just when she thought she had no idea where she was going, had lost the direction to the creek, would never find it for fear of the van, still out there somewhere. She saw the artist again, and then recognized the street ahead, Norman Avenue. This time he was making a figure 8, round and up and down his block. He wore a smile on his face, but not for her now, for he hadn't seen her. No, he smiled for the pleasure of his own motion, for the blowing of his own gray coat behind him. Now he laughed to himself, enjoying his own company like a child. She forgot her fears at the sight of the artist's face, in the glow of his active eyes, who still failed to notice her. It didn't matter to her. She stood with her back to no man's land and watched his rounds some more. She watched his torso move forward and backward to a rhythm in his head, and his feet hover in circles above the pavement. His tires kissed the same asphalt she stood upon, but his body didn't know it. He sat on his bicycle, but she could see that he was swimming in the creek she was looking for.